Hey everyone, and welcome back. This is one of a series of videos exploring topics in California politics. In this video, we're going to look at the California State Legislature. The California State Legislature holds significant importance in the context of American government for several reasons. First, the California State Legislature is the largest state legislature in the U.S., representing nearly 40 million people. As the most populous state and the world's fifth largest economy, California has a substantial impact on national and global affairs. Understanding the dynamics of its legislature provides insights into the complexities of governing a diverse and economically powerful state. California has been at the forefront of policy innovation, introducing progressive legislation that shapes national discourse and influences policy debates in other states. Many of the contemporary trends in areas from environmental regulation to civil rights protection, from healthcare to criminal justice reforms prevalent across the U.S. today have their roots in California. By studying the California State Legislature, we can gain a deeper understanding of development and implementation of innovative policy solutions. California's unique system of direct democracy allows citizens to propose and enact laws through ballot initiatives. The state's legislature must navigate the challenges and opportunities provided by direct democracy, presenting a fascinating case study on the interplay between representative democracy and citizen-driven policymaking. Understanding the structure and functions of the California Legislature sheds light on the balance of power within a state government. By examining its interactions with the executive, the judiciary, and interest groups, we can gain insights into the checks and balances that govern American political systems at both state and national levels. The California Legislature provides a unique lens to study the dynamics of representative democracy. Legislators are elected to serve their constituents, making decisions that impact their daily lives. By examining the legislators' roles, constituent services, and the challenges they face in representing diverse communities, we can develop an appreciation for the complexities of democratic representation. And finally, California's legislature offers a rich understanding of political realities, negotiations, and compromises necessary to pass legislation. With such a diverse array of stakeholders, interest groups, and political parties involved in the state legislative process, examining the California legislature can help us explore the complexities of coalition building, the influence of campaign finance, and the role of public opinion in shaping policy outcomes. The history of the California State Legislature dates back to the early days of the state's formation, but its contemporary structure is a function of both the constitutional provisions that established it and its own historical evolution over time. Article 4 of the 1849 California Constitution established the general framework for state government and prescribed the legislative power in the state would be vested in a bicameral legislature comprised of the Assembly and the Senate. While the Constitution did not specify the size of the chambers, it did provide that the Senate would be between 1/3 and 1/2 of the size of the Assembly, and that 1/3 of the Senate would be up for re-election every cycle. The original state constitution had several interesting provisions, including a provision in Section 29 requiring that legislative districts would be apportioned according to the white population of the region, effectively denying representation to the Asian, Latino, Native, and Black populations of the state. Section 25 imposed a single subject rule on the legislature, meaning that each piece of legislation could only address a single topic. Section 26 prohibited the legislature from granting divorces, effectively making the practice illegal in the state. Section 27 prohibited the creation of any lotteries in the state. And Section 38 required all votes in the legislature to be conducted via voice vote. One of the first actions by the new state legislature was to pass the bicameral legislature and the Legislature Act of 1850. This act further defined the legislative structure, including the number of seats in each house and the outlines of the legislative districts. But as California's population grew rapidly, the size of the legislature expanded to accommodate the increasing number of constituents, and the number of assembly members and senators has changed through the various constitutional amendments. In 1879, the state adopted a new constitution, replacing the 1849 constitution, which was poorly written and difficult to amend. Further, the rapidly growing state population highlighted many of the previous constitution's shortcomings. The new constitution made a number of important changes to the legislative branch. While retaining the bicameral structure, the new constitution fixed the number of senators at 40 and the number of assembly members at 80. It also extended the length of the legislative term from 1 year in the Assembly and 2 years in the Senate to 2- and 4-year terms we're familiar with today. The 1879 Constitution also clarified the powers and responsibilities of the state legislature, establishing the legislative process, including introduction, committee review, and voting on bills. The Constitution also grants the legislature the power to levy taxes, allocate funds, and oversee the state's budget. And finally, the 1879 Constitution dramatically expanded the powers of the legislature, removing many of the restrictions imposed by the 1849 Constitution and granting it the power to address issues in a wide variety of areas, including public health, education, taxation, and local government. This expansion reflected the growing responsibilities and functions of the state government at the time. During the Progressive Era, a number of reforms were introduced in California, many of which had important implications for the state legislature. In 1898, initiative and referendum were adopted into the state constitution, giving voters a greater voice in policymaking in the state. In 1913, the recall provision was adopted, permitting voters to remove elected officials from office before the expiration of their term. We consider all of these reforms, all of which fall under the rubric of direct democracy, in another video. In 1990, California voters approved Proposition 140, which imposed term limits on state legislators. This amendment restricted legislators to serving a maximum of 3 terms, 6 years in the Assembly, and 2 terms, 8 years in the Senate. Term limits aim to promote turnover, reducing the influence of incumbency and bringing fresh perspectives to the legislature. These term limits were amended by Proposition 28 in 2012, which reestablished a lifetime maximum term of 12 years in the state legislature, effectively limiting the ability of members of the state legislature to move back and forth between the chambers to avoid the impact of term limits. Today, California has a bicameral legislature consisting of 2 houses, the State Assembly and the State Senate. Let's take a closer look at the legislative structure and composition of each chamber. The State Assembly is the lower house of the California State Legislature. It has 80 members, each representing a specific assembly district within the state. Assembly members are elected to 2-year terms and can serve a maximum of 3 terms under current term limits. The Speaker of the Assembly is elected by Assembly members and presides over the House, playing a key leadership role. The State Senate is the upper house of the state legislature. It has 40 members, each representing a specific senatorial district within the state. Senators are elected to 4-year terms with half of the seats up for re-election every 2 years. They can serve a maximum of 2 terms under current term limits. The President pro tempore, elected by the Senate members, serves as the leader of the Senate and plays a crucial role in setting the legislative agenda. The California Legislature has been controlled by Democrats since 1994, and Republicans have controlled just 2 of the last 32 legislative sessions. In recent years, Democrats have often held a supermajority in both chambers, permitting them to pass legislation without any Republican support. For example, in the 2022 legislative session, Democrats held 62 of the 80 seats in the Assembly and 32 of the 40 seats in the Senate. Control of the legislature by the Democratic Party is a reflection of the dominance of the party in statewide politics more generally. Nearly half of registered voters in California are registered as Democrats, while just under a quarter are registered as Republicans, and an equal number roughly have no party preference. The remaining 6% are registered with various third parties. Geographically, the party divisions are rooted in a regional distribution of people, with the less populous, more rural Central Valley dominated by Republicans, while Democrats are generally concentrated in the more populated urban coastal areas. Like most states, California redraws the boundaries of its legislative districts following the census to ensure a relatively equal representation of the population in the legislature. California is just one of a handful of states that uses independent, nonpartisan commissions to oversee the redistricting process. This is done to avoid partisan gerrymandering that manipulates electoral district boundaries to disproportionately benefit one party or another. The redistricting process in California is overseen by the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is comprised of 14 members appointed by a panel of 3 independent officials from the state auditor's office. According to the provisions of Proposition 11, which created the Redistricting Commission in 2008, the commission must follow a number of guidelines when redrawing district lines. Districts must be contiguous, made up of a single unbroken area. Districts must be compact, meaning that they should be as close to square or circle as possible. Districts should not be drawn in a way that discriminates on the basis of race, ethnicity, or political affiliation. And finally, districts should be drawn in a way that reflects communities of interest within California. While the size of the two chambers of the state legislature have been fixed by the Constitution since it was drafted in 1879, the population of the state has grown dramatically. At the turn of the century, there were approximately 18,000 people per state assembly member and approximately 37,000 people per state senator. By 2020, there were nearly 500,000 people per state assembly member and almost 1 million per state senator, giving California the highest population per representative in the country. Indeed, in 2020, the average population per representative in the U.S. House of Representatives was 711,000. This means that California's representatives represent a significantly larger number of people than representatives in other states do. This high population per representative in California has a number of implications. First, it makes it difficult for constituents to connect with their representatives. Second, it makes it difficult for representatives to be responsive to the needs of their constituents. Third, it makes it more difficult for representatives to pass legislation that is supported by a majority of their constituents. While proposals have been advanced to expand the number of seats in the state legislature and to introduce proportional representation to provide greater representation to more diverse political viewpoints, neither proposal has advanced beyond the abstract stage. Term limits have had a number of impacts on the California State Legislature. They have led to a more diverse legislature. Before term limits, the California State Legislature was largely dominated by white men. However, since term limits were implemented, the number of women and people of color serving in the legislature has increased significantly. In the 2022 legislative session, for example, women comprised about 46% of assembly members and 39% of senators in California. While still below their proportion of total state population, representation of women in the California legislature is significantly more equitable than in Congress, where just 28% of representatives and 25% of senators are women. California's legislature is also more racially diverse than U.S. Congress. At the state level, 55% of assembly members are people of color and 48% of senators are, roughly mirroring statewide levels of racial diversity. This compares to just 20% of representatives and 11% of senators at the national level. Term limits have also led to a less experienced legislature. Before term limits, legislators were often able to serve for many years and gain a deep understanding of the legislative process. However, since term limits were implemented, legislators have had to learn the ropes on the job. This has made it more difficult for legislators to pass complex legislation and to build relationships with other legislators. It's also empowered legislative staff who tend to be more experienced than the elective representatives they serve. Term limits have changed the nature of lobbying in the legislative process. Before term limits, lobbyists would frequently focus on developing long-term relationships with members of the state legislature. After term limits, lobbyists increasingly focus on developing relationships with the professional staff in the legislature and focus more on providing information to support their legislative priorities. Term limits have also led to greater competition for elected office at all levels, from county boards of supervisors to the U.S. Congress, particularly within the Democratic Party. As elected Democrats seek to find alternative elected offices after they're termed out, they're forced to compete against one another, against other party members for the same seat. This is exacerbated by the top two primary system, which we consider in another video. The lawmaking process in California involves several stages, each playing a critical role in shaping legislation. The process begins when a legislator introduces a bill, either in the state assembly or the state senate. Bills can originate from individual legislators, committees, or even the governor's office. After introduction, the bill is referred to a specific committee based on its subject matter. Committees are responsible for reviewing and analyzing bills, holding hearings, and making recommendations for further action. Committee members, including chairs and vice chairs, play a crucial role in shaping legislation through their discussions and votes. If a bill passes the committee stage, it moves on to the floor of the respective house for debate and voting. During floor consideration, legislators have the opportunity to express their views, propose amendments, and ultimately vote on the bill. Floor leaders, such as the Speaker of the Assembly or the President pro tempore of the Senate, help manage the flow of legislative business and ensure orderly proceedings. In case the Assembly and Senate pass different versions of a bill, a conference committee is formed to reconcile those differences. The conference committee consists of members from both of the houses and works to negotiate a compromise version of the bill. Finally, once a bill is approved by both houses in the same form, it's sent to the governor for consideration. The governor can sign the bill into law, allowing it to take effect, or veto it, preventing it from becoming law. If the governor takes no action within a specified time frame, the bill may become law without their signature. The fate of a proposed bill can be influenced by a variety of factors. First, and perhaps most obviously, the majority party's control often determines the fate of the bills, as they have more influence in setting the legislative agenda and marshaling support for their priorities. Party members tend to vote along party lines, although there can be exceptions based on individual legislators' positions and interests. Party and committee leadership have considerable influence when determining the fate of proposed legislation. Committee chairs can decide if, when, and under what conditions a bill will be taken up by committee. Party leadership also has the power to schedule or not schedule bills for a fuller vote, giving them disproportionate power in the legislative process. Within each party caucuses, formal groups that coordinate work and strategies of like-minded legislators, play a key role. These can be based on demographic factors, for example, the Legislative Women's Caucus, the Black Caucus, or the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, or on interests, for example, the Aviation Caucus or the Environmental Caucus, or on regional representation, for example, the Bay Area Caucus or the Rural Caucus. While most bills require a simple majority to pass each chamber, some bills, primarily those dealing with urgent issues or appropriating money, require a 2/3 majority to pass, making it more difficult to do so. Interest groups representing various sectors and constituencies play a significant role in lobbying legislators, providing input, and shaping the outcome of bills. Their influence can stem from financial support, grassroots organizing, expertise, or the ability to mobilize public opinion. Legislators will often consider public sentiment and feedback from their constituents when making decisions on a bill. Public opinion expressed through media, public hearings, or direct communication can influence legislators' stances on specific issues. The financial implications of a bill, including its impact on the state budget, can also influence its passage or rejection. Any bill that has fiscal implications, either by raising revenue or spending state resources, is referred to the Fiscal Committee as part of the normal legislative process. Those committees scrutinize bills for their fiscal impact, feasibility, and adherence to budgetary constraints. Proposals that require significant funding or create new financial obligations often face greater scrutiny and may require additional support to move forward. And finally, the political climate, public sentiment, and external events can all shape the fate of bills. Factors such as changing public opinion, influential media coverage, or significant events can impact legislators' positions and overall viability of a bill. That concludes our overview of the California State Legislature. Please leave any questions you have in the comment section below, and thanks for watching. Bye.